Hello, viewers. Thank you for tuning in to this webinar, Humboldt Theater Racial Equity Recommendations, a project sponsored by North Coast Repertory Theater. I am Roman Sanchez. I'd like to start with a little bit about me. My name is Roman Sanchez. I am a Mexican-American theater practitioner currently employed by the California Arts Council as the Arts and Corrections Program Analyst and the Re-Entry through the Arts Program Specialist. I spent 5 years in Humboldt County working in, with, and for the theater community in various capacities. During this time in Humboldt, I worked for Ferndale Repertory Theater, Redwood Curtain Theater, Humboldt State University's Theater, Film, and Dance Department, Lime Arts Productions, and Del Arte International. And I also supported projects and initiatives at Plays in the Park, North Coast Repertory Theater, Main Stage Musicals, Arcata Playhouse, Humboldt Light Opera Company, and Children's Theater Humboldt. During this breadth of work, I wore a multitude of hats that included artistic director, assistant executive director, board member, committee member, consultant, producer, director, production and stage manager, an actor, and my favorite, patron. Now, I say all of these organization names and these hats because these experiences have afforded me a very unique perspective, knowing the people, the communities, the programming, the budgets, etc., which have all heavily influenced the information that I have included in this webinar. So this webinar is an extension of a personal letter on behalf of myself to the Humboldt theater community. This webinar, along with its corresponding essay, are an expansion on the themes and ideas expressed in my original letter and are tailored to address the specific needs and challenges that Humboldt County faces. Throughout these materials, I encourage readers and viewers to consider new world views, to display radical empathy, and to let go of the right way to do theater. Now, speed bumps in your planning, large and small, lay ahead. So it is important to remember that systemic reform, cultural competency, and anti-racism are not a destination or a goal, but they are a practice. And that's an adapted quote from Dr. Reggie Daniels. Before we start diving in, I want to acknowledge that I am recording this webinar in what we now call Sacramento, but is the traditional land of the Miwok, Nisenan, Maidu, and Patwin peoples, past and present, and honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have stewarded it throughout the generations. This calls on me, and hopefully to you as well, to continue to learn how to be better stewards of the land that we inhabit. And here's a brief look at our agenda. We'll start with a little bit of background of Humboldt County and on Humboldt County Theater. And then we'll move into some phases, action items, and we'll end with some resources and recommended readings. The bulk of this webinar are those two sections, number 3 and 4 on your screen, phases and action items. The phases provide a very generic overview that your organization can use as a guidepost when engaging with a consultant. The action items are ideas and initiatives that do not require a consultant and rather are easily available for your organization to implement. Every phase and action item and resource that is on here and in the essay was tailored to the Humboldt County theater scene. I've used my firsthand accounts and experiences along with hearing what many other BIPOC have experienced and have taken those into consideration while preparing these materials. The US Census Bureau identified Humboldt County as home to more working artists per capita than any other county in California. Now that's noteworthy. Humboldt County's 2019 demographics, according to the Census Bureau, are 83% white, 1.5% Black or African American, 6% American Indian or Alaskan Native, 0.3% Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander, and 3% Asian. And because the Census Bureau distinguishes that Hispanic/Latino is not a race, 12% selected Hispanic/Latino as an identifier in a separate question. Again, that number is 12.1%. Humboldt County is home to at least 19 active theater organizations. And active theater organizations, for the purpose of this initiative, is being defined as an organization that provides theatrical programming, be it education or productions, at least once every 24 months. And those organizations include the list on your screen, starting with the Arcata Arts Institute, Arcata Playhouse, All-Star Theater, Children's Theater Humboldt, College of the Redwoods, Del Arte Inc., Eureka High School, Ferndale Repertory Theater, Humboldt Light Opera Company, Humboldt State University's Theater, Film, and Dance Department, Lime Arts Productions, Main Stage Musicals, Night Vision, North Coast Preparatory and Performing Arts Academy, North Coast Repertory Theater, Plays in the Park, Redwood Curtain Theater, St. Bernard's Academy, and Synapsis Nova / The Sanctuary. Of these 19 organizations, 2 of them are led by a person of color, and 2 of them have a board of directors, or the equivalent being an educational staff, with at least 25% of the makeup by BIPOC. Again, those numbers are 2 organizations are led by a person of color, and 2 have a board of directors or an educational staff with at least 25% of the makeup being from BIPOC. These are 8 phases of organizational racial equity and should be implemented by individual organizations. Phase number 1, I have called this phase Whiteness, because the stakeholders involved are the white staff and white board members. This phase begins with members recognizing their whiteness, understanding white fragility, and often experiencing white guilt, and also evaluating the type of ally you want to become, be it active versus passive. It is during this phase that you will answer for yourself, will I use my privilege to ensure BIPOC have a role in Humboldt Theater if they want it? Will I give up opportunities to make space for BIPOC in our community? Will I publicly call out theaters and other arts organizations who are making mistakes and are being counterproductive in this moment? Will I be accountable for my mistakes? Am I willing to publicly and privately apologize to any stakeholders who may have been negatively impacted from artistic choices I have made? And lastly, will I commit to reading, hearing, and learning as much as possible? Next, in phase number 2, this is called internal audit. It is a platform for your white staff and board members to have a roundtable discussion and have an internal audit of your organization's current practices, the season planning, the artistic engagement, your marketing, etc. After noting those current practices, a conversation should be had regarding the lengths that your organization is willing to go to and the stances you are willing to take as an organization. Please note that if you have BIPOC on your staff and or your board, do not assume that they will assist in this process. During this phase, you may draft a letter or a statement to the community noting your organization's stance and apologize for wrongdoings. You may learn about and craft a land acknowledgement and or a colonial theater statement. I have included some examples in history and resources. You will learn about the history of EDIA practices, that's equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility practices. Reread all language on your website and social media to evaluate how the language has aged and updated as needed. And also employ the new verbiage, be it the statements of solidarity or the land acknowledgements, etc., on your website. Now, this phase is titled Crafting a Strategic Plan, phase number 3. If you haven't done so prior to this phase is when you should hire an outside BIPOC consultant or an advisor to assist in creating a racial equity plan for your organization, which will include measurable and non-measurable outcomes, meaningful community engagement, actionable steps. And this consultant or another consultant can also serve as a resource to evaluate your yearly spending, your yearly budgets in an effort to reallocate funding toward aiding these initiatives. For example, I think of perhaps you might lower your marketing costs for a season and allocate those saved funds toward one of the action items that I'll mention later. Phase number 4, this is stakeholder consultation. This is the first of hopefully many community dialogues you engage in with BIPOC artists, audiences, patrons, and stakeholders. This is your opportunity to listen to their needs, requests, and feedback. There should be multiple ways for these stakeholders to contribute to the conversation, thinking about in-person focus groups, surveys, follow-ups to those surveys or those focus groups, etc. Active listening is key here. And as I'll talk about more in depth later, two-way meaningful relationships are crucial. So consider, what do BIPOC who participate in this dialogue receive in return? Now you are at phase number 5, assess and adjust. After actively listening to the comments and feedback from the BIPOC community, round back to the racial equity plan and make the necessary adjustments to accurately reflect the needs of those who are willing to vocalize their thoughts. Make sure that this plan includes dates and soft deadlines to hold you and your organization accountable. Now is the time to implement and execute. This is the phase to start implementation of the initiatives your organization has committed to. You want to educate all stakeholders associated with your organization, looking at volunteers, patrons, community partners, etc., and be okay with and prepared to adapt along the way as necessary, because you will undoubtedly run into challenges and, quote, get things wrong the first time around, but the ability to recognize, learn, and shift is crucial. Phase number 7 is the evaluation. You will have set a benchmark date or several dedicated to reflecting on the initiatives in their current state. If you implemented evaluation forms or surveys and collected data along the way, now is the time to sort and analyze it, because by the end of this phase, you will have identified what is working and what needs improvement. For areas needing improvement, re-engage with the BIPOC community to assess what needs to be amended moving forward. Now is the phase of the continuum. I call it adjust, rewind, repeat. Following your evaluation phase, Adjust as needed to strengthen the initiatives. You want to rewind back to phase number 2 to re-engage your internal stakeholders in a dialogue and repeat that phase all the way up to number 8 indefinitely. Upon repetition, the phase crafting a strategic plan can consist of touching base with your original consultant, or engaging with another new consultant, or addressing a consultant to discuss a specific need or a specific project in your racial equity plan. So here's a recap of all of the recommended phases. There are 8 of them, starting with whiteness and ending on adjust, rewind, repeat. When contacting a consultant to aid in these phases, be as detailed as possible in your expectations of them. Ideas of items that you may request from your consultant include leading the conversations with all of the stakeholders, facilitating the community dialogues and the outreach, helping in the creation of a racial equity framework or a strategic plan for your organization, co-planning and co-implementing specific projects, collecting and analyzing the data throughout the entire process, recommending the financial reallocations, researching development opportunities and drafting narratives for those development opportunities, assisting in the overall nuances of each phase, reviewing and providing feedback on new statements and acknowledgements, even providing feedback and reviewing of board handbooks and hiring policies, your contracts, keeping an eye out for BIPOC inclusivity and accessibility. Now, here are some action items, 6 initiatives to implement. Each action item is designed to create meaningful two-way relationships amongst BIPOC and organizations. I see all of the action items as containing 2 branches of execution. The first is as an individual organization, and the second is as a cohort of organizations. A cohort execution could look something like the existing Interact ticket policy, which is a complimentary ticket policy intended for artists currently working on shows, developed by several organizations in the county with an identical practice at each organization. So here's the first one. It is reparation pricing. Reparation pricing refers to the act of offering discounts and/or free of charge services and goods. I recommend piloting a reparation pricing program to offer BIPOC community members and families free or reduced prices to see shows. Now, what could this look like? Well, execution as an organization or as a cohort could manifest in several ways, including offering a reparation pricing option on website orders, blocking off X amount of seats at each performance available to only BIPOC, giving BIPOC and/or BIPOC organizations tickets that are redeemable at any performance. I think of organizations like Black Humboldt or the NAACP Eureka chapter or Centro del Pueblo. It could be designated performances for only BIPOC attendance. So you would mark sold out on your website as soon as that option is available. The dates are available on your website. Pay what you can options. Or even a sliding scale purchase option where an individual can purchase a ticket for $1, $5, $10, $20, $25, even $30. It's those higher ticket purchases that will help subsidize the lower ones. Or providing concession comps. This is another step that you can take in welcoming BIPOC in your doors, and it is a gesture of gratitude for them showing up. Announcing an initiative like this should go far and wide. You're going to want to talk about this in your programs, in your brochures. Send press releases about this initiative. Tell your subscribers. Include this in the individual show press releases that you send out. Make sure the critics who come to review the shows know to include this reparation pricing policy in the ticket prices of their reviews. Eliminating the financial barrier is a huge endeavor, but a necessary one. A great example that comes to mind is Del Arte's free annual holiday show. The audience demographics are diverse. They are representative of Humboldt County's demographics, and many attribute the free ticket option as a large contributor to why they attend. The second initiative is educational opportunities. Once you have cultivated new audience members, some are going to be interested in learning more about how to get further involved with your organization or with theater, as a performer, as a designer, as a volunteer, etc. And it is your duty to provide these formal and informal education opportunities. Execution as an organization or as a cohort could manifest in several ways, including workshops and master classes, which would of course be free to BIPOC, ranging from areas of performance to areas behind the scenes to theater leadership. Investing in a hyper-specific but a necessary workshop led by an outside the county facilitator that could be used to benefit the Humboldt theater community at large, including but not limited to theatrical intimacy or art equities beyond diversity, their board training, or even race forward, all which, some of which may be geared toward your white colleagues and white theater practitioners, but this education would help the BIPOC community at large. I think these learning opportunities serve a great purpose to educate your white colleagues and white artists so BIPOC don't have to. Also, the learning opportunities allow participants to gain new perspectives on how to become better allies, and that is invaluable. Assistantships and apprenticeships, which, if taken by BIPOC, should be paid to BIPOC, providing opportunities to shadow, learn from, and gain hands-on learning. Panels and Q&A sessions, providing opportunities for additional pre-show and post-show dialogue between audiences and the casts and crews of shows. Trying to get your audience to recognize, learn, and dialogue about race, white supremacy, and representation. And remember, if you hire BIPOC educators and instructors for either the workshops on the last slide or these panels and Q&A sessions, to invite them to consider doing a session exclusively for BIPOC. For example, a pre-show discussion for BIPOC by BIPOC before a show. Creating and/or sharing educational materials. I think about hosting webinars and creating short instructional videos, creating handouts, or sharing regional theaters' education materials, sharing the poignant articles that they are putting out, sharing some of the scripts that are being produced in this time. Especially now when the resources to do so are so abundant and the tools to do so are literally at your fingertips. All of the aforementioned execution ideas of these educational opportunities should be publicized and marketed as you would any show. A great example of this is Redwood Curtain Theaters and Lime Arts Productions education seasons. Each season and each class paid the teaching artists quite competitively, especially for Humboldt County. They provided scholarships and waivers for BIPOC. They received great attention from the media, and they made respectable net profits at the end of the day. Next is apply for funding. Why is it that only 2 arts organizations in Humboldt County continuously receive National Endowment for the Arts funding? Why do only 2 arts organizations in Humboldt County continuously receive California Arts Council funding? Why aren't all theater organizations applying for every funding opportunity? The answer is bandwidth. That said, it is crucial that you invest in your community. Like all investments, it takes money to make money. But allocating the time, energy, and resources to apply to funding opportunities is an investment in your organization and your community. If you have to hire a part-time seasonal employee, it will pay off. Examples of grant programs that I think would benefit Humboldt County theater organizations include the California Arts Council's organizational and professional development grants. The OD grant, it's an easy $5,000 that provides funding for one-time consulting activities. And that could look like audits, earned income strategies, financial management, budgeting, strategic planning, board development, public relations, program evaluation, and even things like software implementation and web design. The professional development grant, it's another easy $3,000, and this program provides funding for staff members, artists, or even board members of the organization. Professional development activities may include tuition for classes or workshops, or registration fees for conferences and festivals and trainings, and even in-state travel expenses to attend those classes or those conferences or those seminars. I would love to see you apply for projects like engaging your staff for board with a racial equity consultant, or sending your leadership to trainings specific to equity, diversity, and inclusion. These grants have helped several organizations in Humboldt County to articulate the programming that they're doing, and also to give them bandwidth to become more inclusive and more accessible to BIPOC communities. Here are 2 more, the CAC's Local Impact and the Artisan Communities Grants. The Local Impact Grant, this is up to $20,000, and it supports community-driven arts projects for small and mid-sized arts organizations. I repeat, for small and mid-sized arts organizations to foster equity, access, and opportunity in historically marginalized communities by centering the arts as a vehicle for building strong, healthy, resilient communities. And the Artisan Communities Grant, again, is up to $20,000, and it centers artists as their artistic processes as vehicles for community vitality. These grants support artistic residencies in community settings. Organizations and partners and community members must support the vision of the artists to produce creative projects that are relevant and responsive to their community. And I would love to see you apply for a local impact grant to produce programming for the BIPOC community, or apply for an Artisan Communities grant to engage in community-driven art with these underserved populations. The Local Impact Grant helped NCRT produce Life is a Dream, and it helped the Arcata Playhouse tour their production of A Woman's Places in Her Home. These opportunities exist. Grab them. And then on the federal level, the National Endowment for the Arts, they have the grants for art projects and Our Town. Grants for art projects, it's anywhere from $10,000 to $100,000. And these grants support, it's so vague, artistically excellent work that celebrate creativity and cultural heritage, invite mutual respect for differing beliefs and values, and enrich humanity. Their Our Town grant is anywhere from $25,000 to $150,000. And it is the NEA's Creative Placemaking Grants Program. The program supports projects that integrate arts, culture, and design activities into efforts that strengthen communities by advancing the local economic, physical, or social outcomes. Successful Our Town projects ultimately lay down the groundwork for systemic changes that sustain the integration of arts into local strategies for strengthening communities. These projects do require a partnership between a local government entity and a nonprofit organization, one of which must be a cultural organization and should engage in partnership with other sectors, thinking about like agriculture or economic development or education and youth, environment and energy, health, housing, public safety, transportation, etc. When awarded these types of funds, these grants, organizations then receive more resources to reinvest. These budgets on these grants include administrative costs, overhead, salaries and stipends, materials, printing, equipment rental, outreach, transportation, so much more. The line items you create. If an organization were to apply and be awarded project-specific grants for projects centering BIPOC, it provides the means to offer larger stipends to those BIPOC artists and those BIPOC consultants and those BIPOC teams. Larger stipends make it easier for BIPOC to be able to commit to the time and energy needed for the shows and classes. For BIPOC productions, if awarded a grant, you'd now be able to allocate more funding to support those higher quality design elements and more toward marketing and outreach. And all of these byproducts of receiving a grant would result in excellent programming, meaningful relationships, community building, and support for the local BIPOC community. And on this slide, you might also consider designating a crowdfunding campaign or a snail mail campaign or even a fundraising event for the purpose of supporting these same initiatives. Next is get BIPOC representation on all decision-making levels, keeping in mind the concept of representation versus resonance. Now, tokenizing BIPOC consciously or subconsciously is counterproductive to the intent of this movement. The act of tokenizing has manifested as organizations allotting a single, quote, BIPOC show per season with little to no input from BIPOC, or casting one BIPOC in an ensemble so as not to be accused of being an all-white show, or garnering a BIPOC board member for the purpose of diversifying your board. An organization must strive far beyond tokenizing, and the makeup of your organization, are the makeup of your organization and the productions that it produces representative of the county's demographics? What about the state's demographics? True inclusion has BIPOC representation on all tiers of an organizational hierarchy, including, but not limited to, leadership. Consider some of those apprenticeship and shadowing opportunities that I mentioned earlier. Board members. Board members should bring something to the table. Consider the vast knowledge, insight, and perspective BIPOC bring to the table. Is that not valuable enough? Season selection committees. These positions need to be two-way relationships. They are providing a great deal. Reading, dialoguing, analyzing, lots of time, lots of thought and energy goes into people that occupy these positions. So what do they get in return? Consider giving them a stipend, some comps, some concession comps, even program ad space in your programs. Are you an organization that don't think you have the resources to lead an initiative like this? If so, organize a cohort of organizations who can pull resources and create a cohort-wide BIPOC season selection committee that you utilize to read and recommend scripts to the cohort, preview season selections, and examine for any problematic shows. They might even preview directors' casting to ensure that color-conscious casting is positively serving the BIPOC community, thinking about wanting to refrain from casting BIPOC as the villains and monsters, as the maids and the servants, etc. Perhaps this BIPOC season selection committee is comprised of local, formerly local, and non-local BIPOC. And again, thinking back to representation versus resonance, not only should BIPOC audiences be seeing folks who look like them on stage, but the stories and themes of those plays should be relevant and poignant to that community. Lastly, listen to what they have to say. If they say a show is disrespectful or racist and or not relevant for BIPOC, then they are right and you are wrong. Directors. BIPOC directors should receive more opportunities than only being invited to direct, quote, BIPOC shows. You may want to educate directors on color-conscious casting as opposed to color-blind casting. Educating your directors on cultural appropriation. Same thing with your designers. You might want to educate the designers on cultural appropriation. Performers, of course. Sellers and distributors, thinking about buying materials that are going to be used for properties, makeup and hair, costumes, scenery, etc., from BIPOC-owned businesses as often as you can. And you might even continue this practice with routine purchases, looking at office supplies, equipment, tools, maintenance and repair, concessions, etc. And critics, I understand. Trust me, I understand. There are not currently any critics of color currently employed by local media, but making the demand to have critics of color write reviews for the BIPOC shows is a necessity. Making a list and recommending some BIPOC or some stellar ally practitioners who can remain unbiased and have an extensive repertoire, folks who are ready to empower the BIPOC community. There are a handful of trained Kennedy Center American College Theater Festival respondents in the county who have received training on how to respectfully respond to performances and productions. And some of them have even attended respondent cultural competency trainings. Those KCACTF respondents in Humboldt County include the folks employed and associated with HSU and Del Arte. Former residents, include them, utilize them, ask them. People who have once lived in Humboldt and were active members of the theater community have a very very unique insight and perspective. Seeing, hearing, and participating in the theater community outside of Humboldt provides the opportunity to share and be an asset to your organization. I think about the ability and opportunity to share scripts, fundraising ideas, outreach initiatives, programming, and even recommendations of guest artists, because 7 of the 19 organizations have brought in guest artists from outside Humboldt County to work on programming in the last 3 years. How exciting would it be if some of those artists were BIPOC? Some of the biggest advocates for diverse storytelling came from folks who landed in Humboldt County by affiliation with an organization. These people too would be an asset to have on any and all levels of an organizational hierarchy, similar to the 4th item, representation on all decision-making levels. How can you get former residents on all decision-making levels? I think the examples that leading regional theaters use in their board makeup most include a well-balanced representation of artists, funders, community or government liaisons, and thought leaders. And the expectation for each is different. I ask, does this sound like your board? Is your board missing thought leaders? Next is reporting systems. We can all name someone or several people who have made us feel uncomfortable, unwelcome, and/or unheard while working on a production. And I can guarantee BIPOC practitioners have a list. Organizations' leadership need to create an anonymous issue reporting tool and stop working with individuals who are racist and sexist, from microaggressions to macroaggressions. How is engaging with these racist, homophobic, sexist, etc. artists supposed to make BIPOC feel comfortable, included, and empowered? While no organization currently has the resources to employ a full-time HR representative, easy reporting systems can be implemented at individual organizations. Piloting a practice of postmortems or survey evaluations after each production tells your teams that you are eager to grow, that you want to listen, and that you will protect them. But more important than starting these systems is your commitment to follow through, reading through the evaluations in a timely manner, adapting to the criticisms, and relaying the information, both positive and negative, to the necessary stakeholders, and taking into account any team members who didn't make others feel safe. It is your specific duty, especially as white allies, to protect the livelihoods of your BIPOC artists and not uphold the white supremacist values by ending relationships where necessary. I'd like to share some resources and some recommended reading. Thinking back again to that concept of equality and inclusion is not a destination, but a practice. And some of these resources and readings can be a part of that practice. Some recommended resources. These are websites and platforms that I highly recommend getting familiar with. For the ones that offer it, subscribing to their newsletters, looking at Art Equity, Fake Equity Blog, HowlRound, the League of Resident Theaters Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion resource page. They have an entire page on their website dedicated to even more resources. The NNPN, the National New Play Network, and their online platform of new plays, Race to Lead, and the We See You White American Theater. Here are a list of some recommended articles. Again, you can find these on the corresponding essay that goes with this webinar. But the titles include 4 Black artists on how racism corrodes the theater world, published in the New York Times. Governance as Leadership, reframing the work of nonprofit boards. How an EDI advocate can improve your rehearsal. It's an American Theater article. How slave play got 800 Black people to the theater. Also an American Theater. Inclusion, diversity, equity, and access, why now in the arts and culture sectors. And indigenous land acknowledgements from the website of the Native Governance Center. Here's one more slide of recommended articles, which include Instigating Institutional Change Towards Decolonization, published on HowlRound. Put some Latinx representation in your puta syllabus, also in HowlRound. The Case for Reparations, which I think pairs complementary with People Are Again talking about slavery reparations, but it's a complex and thorny issue. The Diversity of Anne Frank in American Theater. Training with the Difference, also in American Theater. And lastly, We Don't Want Your Statements, American Theater, or The Solidarity We Actually Needed in HowlRound. Now, these are just 2 slides. I'm sure that upon reading, learning, and educating yourself about the themes and philosophies and concepts and initiatives in these articles, you will find yourself in a rabbit hole of further readings and equally helpful and equally useful articles, resources, and people. Here are some books that I recommend. Again, this list is also available in the corresponding essay. Some of these books are a little expensive, so I would recommend a cohort to purchase some and share them with the rest of the cohort. Looking at Black acting methods, critical approaches, casting a movement, the Welcome Table Initiative, embodying Black experience, stillness, critical memory, and the Black body. Staging Sex, best practices, tools, and techniques for theatrical intimacy. The Great White Way, Race and the Broadway Musical. Tactical Performance, the theory and practice of serious play. Theater and Race. And a classic, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria, and Other Conversations About Race. All right, those are all of my racial equity recommendations to the Humboldt theater community. If you are viewing this, you are likely in phase number 1 or phase number 2 with yourself or your organization. So thank you, sincerely. I send a very warm thank you for your openness and your willingness to educate yourself. I know there was a lot of information and a lot of ideas in this webinar, so I highly recommend reading, skimming, reviewing the corresponding essay that, that corresponds with this webinar. This last slide here has my email. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or if you have any further inquiries. And I would like to close with this James Baldwin quote: "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. Thank you again. Bye-bye.